It's dawn at Fort Davis, Texas, in the summer of 1867. The temperature will hit 110 degrees by noon. A cavalry patrol is forming up, 20 men of the 9th Cavalry, preparing for a week-long scout through the Chihuahuan Desert. These soldiers are former slaves. Many still have scars on their backs from whips. They're riding worn-out horses, carrying outdated carbines, headed into Apache country where they might not come back. And here's what makes this remarkable. They have the lowest desertion rate in the entire United States Army. Not just lower than white cavalry regiments stationed at comfortable eastern forts, lower than everyone. The men least likely to run away are the ones treated worst, paid the same, given the hardest assignments, and offered almost no recognition for their service. Between 1866 and 1891, approximately 12,500 black soldiers served in 4 segregated regiments on the American frontier. They built hundreds of miles of roads and telegraph lines. They fought in 177 engagements. They escorted mail coaches, protected railroad workers, mapped uncharted territories, and pursued some of the most formidable warriors in American history. 18 of them earned the Medal of Honor. And for over a century, their story was barely told. This is the story of the Buffalo Soldiers, the men who helped build the American West, while the America they were building refused to let them eat in its restaurants. The Civil War ended in April 1865. By that summer, 4 million formerly enslaved people were free and faced an impossible question. Now what? The Freedmen's Bureau tried to help, but in the South, freedom meant sharecropping that was barely different from slavery. It meant black codes that criminalized unemployment and vagrancy, laws designed to force black men back onto plantations. It meant violence from groups like the Ku Klux Klan, which formed in 1865 and terrorized black communities throughout Reconstruction. For many young black men, there was one option that offered something different: the Army. On July 28, 1866, Congress passed legislation authorizing the creation of 6 all-black regiments in the regular peacetime Army. 4 were infantry, the 38th, 39th, 40th, and 41st. 2 were cavalry, the 9th and 10th. In 1869, the 4 infantry regiments were consolidated into 2. The 24th and 25th Infantry, together with the 9th and 10th Cavalry. These became the backbone of the U.S. military presence on the western frontier. The cavalry regiments, the 9th and 10th, became known as the Buffalo Soldiers. The origin of that name is disputed. The most common explanation is that Plains Indians, likely the Cheyenne or Comanche, gave them this name because their dark curly hair resembled the buffalo's mane. Another theory suggests it was their fierce fighting style that earned the comparison. The buffalo was sacred to Plains tribes, central to their survival and spirituality. Whatever the origin, the name carried respect. When native warriors called you buffalo, they weren't mocking you. They were acknowledging that you were dangerous, resilient, and worthy of attention. The soldiers embraced the name with pride. The 10th Cavalry even adopted a buffalo on their regimental crest. But who were these men? Many were veterans of the United States colored troops who had fought in the Civil War. By 1865, over 180,000 black soldiers had served in the Union Army. They'd proven themselves in battle at Fort Wagner, Milliken's Bend, and Petersburg. Some had been free men before the war. Most had been enslaved. After the war, civilian life offered few prospects. Farming meant sharecropping under exploitative contracts. Cities offered menial jobs, porters, servants, laborers, with no security and little dignity. The Army offered $13 a month, regular meals, a uniform, and something harder to quantify: respect within the regiment, even if the world outside denied it. Literacy rates among Buffalo Soldiers were higher than the national average for black Americans at the time. These weren't desperate men with no options. Many were ambitious men seeking opportunity. But here's what they got: the worst posts, the worst equipment, and assignments nobody else wanted. Fort Davis in West Texas sat in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert. Summer temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees. Water was scarce. Supplies arrived irregularly. The fort was surrounded by Apache, Comanche, and Kickapoo raiders who knew the terrain infinitely better than any soldier. Fort Huachuca in Arizona Territory was even more isolated, deep in Apache country, where Cochise and later Geronimo operated. The nearest settlement of any size was days away. Patrols could last weeks, covering hundreds of miles through mountains and desert with no backup. Fort Robinson in Nebraska and Fort Sill in Indian Territory weren't much better. These weren't the comfortable garrison posts back east. These were frontier assignments where soldiers built their own barracks, dug their own wells, and faced genuine danger regularly. The equipment was worse. Buffalo soldiers received cast-off horses that white cavalry units had rejected, animals too old, too temperamental, or too worn out. Their weapons were often outdated Springfield carbines, single-shot rifles that required reloading after every shot while facing enemies with repeating rifles. And every regiment, cavalry and infantry alike, was commanded exclusively by white officers. Army regulations prohibited black men from becoming commissioned officers. A few exceptions existed, chaplains and rarely a battlefield commission, but command positions were reserved for whites only. Many of the white officers who volunteered to lead black regiments were sincere abolitionists who respected their men. Colonel Benjamin Grierson, who commanded the 10th Cavalry, was deeply committed to his soldiers' welfare. Captain Nicholas Nolan of the 10th Cavalry nearly died alongside his men during the terrible Staked Plains incident of 1877 when they ran out of water during a patrol. But other officers saw it as a dead-end assignment. Leading black troops meant you'd probably never be promoted beyond that regiment. So the Buffalo soldiers faced discrimination from every direction. The Army gave them the hardest jobs. White civilians refused to serve them in town, and even some of their own officers resented them. Yet when you look at the desertion statistics, something remarkable emerges. Between 1867 and 1891, the desertion rate for white cavalry regiments averaged about 25 per 1,000. For the 9th and 10th Cavalry, around 18 per 1,000, consistently, year after year. The men who had the most reason to leave were the least likely to desert. Why? Because inside the regiment, they had something precious, dignity. They wore the uniform of the United States Army. They were soldiers, not servants, and within their units they formed a brotherhood that transcended the racism outside. That uniform meant something. It meant you were more than what the South said you were, more than a sharecropper, more than a laborer. You were a cavalryman. You had a job that required skill, courage, and discipline, and no white civilian who refused to serve you in a saloon could take that away. So what did Buffalo soldiers actually do? The primary mission of frontier cavalry wasn't combat, it was presence. A cavalry patrol riding through West Texas or Arizona served multiple purposes. It showed settlers that the Army was active, discouraging raids. It gathered intelligence about movements of Apache or Comanche bands. It protected infrastructure like telegraph lines and stage routes. And it responded to incidents, raids on ranches, attacks on travelers, stolen livestock. Most patrols lasted 1 to 3 weeks. Soldiers would ride out from the fort carrying rations, ammunition, blankets, and not much else. They'd cover 15 to 30 miles per day, depending on terrain. They'd sleep on the ground. They'd water their horses at whatever streams or springs they could find, sometimes going days without adequate water. The work was exhausting, monotonous, and occasionally terrifying. In the summer of 1877, a patrol from the 10th Cavalry under Captain Nicholas Nolan and Lieutenant Charles Cooper set out from Fort Concho, Texas, pursuing a Comanche raiding party. They entered the Llano Estacado, the Staked Plains, a vast flat expanse of West Texas with almost no water. For 4 days, they searched for water and found none. Men started drinking their own urine. Horses collapsed and died. Some soldiers went mad from thirst. 4 men died before they finally found water. That's the reality of frontier cavalry service. You are more likely to die from heat exhaustion, snakebite, or falling off your horse than from an enemy bullet. But the Buffalo Soldiers did far more than patrol. Between 1867 and 1890, Buffalo Soldiers constructed hundreds of miles of roads through mountain passes, across deserts, linking isolated forts to supply routes. They strung telegraph wire across vast distances, connecting remote outposts to civilization. They protected the workers building railroads. They escorted mail coaches and freight wagons. They fought prairie fires. They mapped uncharted territories. And yes, they fought. Between 1868 and 1890, the 9th and 10th Cavalry participated in 177 recorded engagements. Most weren't large battles. They were skirmishes. A dozen soldiers encountering a raiding party, a running fight across 20 miles of desert, a siege at a waterhole, an ambush in a canyon. The Apache campaigns were particularly brutal. Apache warriors under leaders like Victorio and Geronimo were among the most skilled fighters in the world. They knew every inch of the Chihuahuan Desert and the mountains of southern New Mexico and Arizona. They could cover 60 miles on foot in a day. They could survive on a handful of mesquite beans and water from hidden springs that no white soldier could find. In 1879 and 1880, the 9th and 10th Cavalry pursued Victorio across hundreds of miles of the Southwest. It was exhausting, frustrating work. Victorio would raid a settlement, then vanish into the mountains. Soldiers would chase him for weeks, only to have him double back and strike somewhere else. Buffalo Soldiers fought Victorio at Rattlesnake Springs and various locations across southern New Mexico and West Texas. Eventually, Mexican forces killed Victorio in Mexico in October 1880. But it was the relentless pursuit by Buffalo Soldiers that wore his band down and drove them south. The reality of these campaigns wasn't heroic charges. It was days of riding through 110-degree heat with limited water, wearing wool uniforms, trying to follow tracks across rocky ground, hoping you didn't ride into an ambush. Buffalo Soldiers respected their Apache adversaries. Many spoke of them with admiration, warriors who fought brilliantly for their land and people. The conflict was tragic on both sides, but the soldiers had a job to do, and they did it professionally. And through it all, they faced discrimination that never stopped. When soldiers rode into a frontier town on leave, they often couldn't get served in saloons. Store owners would refuse their business, restaurants would turn them away. Local whites would sometimes harass them or even attack them, knowing that a black soldier who fought back faced court-martial while a white civilian faced nothing. One soldier wrote in his diary, "We are good enough to fight for them, but not good enough to drink beside them." Court-martial records show that black soldiers were disciplined more harshly for the same infractions as white soldiers. A white trooper who got drunk and started a fight might face a reprimand. A black trooper faced jail time or dishonorable discharge, yet they stayed. They re-enlisted at higher rates than white soldiers. They maintained discipline. They performed their duties. Why? One Buffalo Soldier, writing years later, put it simply, "Inside the regiment, we were men. Outside, we might not be. But inside, with our brothers, we were soldiers." And that was enough. On May 20th, 1870, Sergeant Emmanuel Stantz of the 9th Cavalry was leading a small detachment near Kickapoo Springs, Texas, when they encountered a group of raiders who had stolen horses from a nearby ranch. He led his men in a running fight across several miles of rough terrain. They recovered the stolen horses. They pursued the raiders. They engaged them again at another location, forcing them to retreat. Stantz personally led 2 charges against superior numbers. For this action, Emmanuel Stantz became the first Buffalo Soldier to receive the Medal of Honor. His citation reads simply, "Gallantry in action." Between 1870 and 1890, 18 Buffalo Soldiers received the Medal of Honor. Private Henry Johnson, 9th Cavalry, earned his medal in 1879 at Milk River, Colorado. During a sustained engagement with Ute warriors, Johnson made multiple trips through hostile country delivering dispatches that contributed to saving the besieged command. Sergeant John Denny, 9th Cavalry, held his position when attacked by a much larger Apache force in 1879. When ammunition ran low, he retrieved ammunition from wounded soldiers and redistributed it, keeping the patrol from being overrun. These were men who demonstrated consistent courage, leadership, and tactical skill under the worst conditions imaginable. But perhaps the most famous Buffalo Soldier story is about perseverance against a different kind of enemy. Henry Ossian Flipper was born into slavery in Georgia in 1856. After emancipation, his family managed to provide him with education. In 1873, he received an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. He was not the first black cadet. Several had entered before him. All had been forced out through harassment, violence, and systematic abuse. For 4 years, Flipper endured what he later described as silencing, a practice where white cadets refused to speak to him except when required by duty. He ate alone. He studied alone. He was excluded from every social activity. Fellow cadets destroyed his belongings. They tried everything to break him. He refused to break. On June 14, 1877, Henry O. Flipper became the first black cadet to graduate from West Point. He was assigned to the 10th Cavalry at Fort Sill, where he supervised construction of a drainage system that eliminated malaria-breeding mosquito pools. But in 1881, Flipper was accused of embezzling funds. The evidence was thin and likely fabricated. He was acquitted of embezzlement, but found guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer. He was dishonorably discharged. For the rest of his life, Flipper fought to clear his name. He worked as a mining engineer, a surveyor, and a translator, brilliant and accomplished in every field he entered. In 1976, 36 years after his death, the Army granted him an honorable discharge. In 1999, President Clinton issued a posthumous pardon. Justice came a century too late, and then there's Cathay Williams, the only documented female Buffalo Soldier. Williams was born enslaved in Missouri around 1844. During the Civil War, she served with Union Army units as a cook and washerwoman. When the war ended, she wanted to continue as a soldier, not a cook. So on November 15, 1866, she disguised herself as a man, took the name William Cathay, and enlisted in the 38th Infantry. For nearly 2 years, she served, marching to posts in New Mexico, standing guard duty, going on patrols. But in 1868, while hospitalized, a surgeon discovered she was a woman. She was discharged on medical grounds. Her story was almost forgotten until historians uncovered her records in the 1970s. By 1890, the frontier was closing. The vast open ranges were being fenced with barbed wire. Railroads connected every major settlement, but the Buffalo Soldiers didn't disappear. In 1898, the United States went to war with Spain. On July 1, 1898, the 9th and 10th Cavalry participated in fighting at San Juan Heights and Kettle Hill in Cuba. The popular story says Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders won the day. The truth is more complicated. The Buffalo Soldiers were already engaged when Roosevelt's volunteers arrived. The units fought together under withering fire. Roosevelt initially praised the black cavalrymen. But later, as he became a national political figure, his account changed. The Buffalo Soldiers' role was minimized. This pattern, recognition in the moment, erasure in history, would repeat throughout their service. After Cuba, Buffalo Soldier units served in the Philippines from 1899 to 1902. In 1916, they deployed to the Mexican border during the pursuit of Pancho Villa. Through World War I and World War II, the regiments continued, though always segregated. It wasn't until July 26, 1948, that President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, mandating military desegregation. The last Buffalo Soldier cavalry units were deactivated in the early 1950s. The Buffalo Soldiers, as segregated regiments, ceased to exist, but their legacy didn't disappear. Here's the paradox. They defended a nation that refused to defend them. They built infrastructure for people who wouldn't serve them in restaurants. They wore the uniform of an army that wouldn't make them officers. So why did they do it? They served because the uniform meant something. In a country that told black men they were inferior, the uniform said otherwise. It said, "You are a soldier of the United States Army. You have duties, you have responsibilities. Inside the regiment, surrounded by brothers who shared your experiences, you weren't just a former slave. You were Sergeant Stantz. You were Corporal Greaves. You were Private Johnson. You had rank. You had respect. You had dignity." One Buffalo soldier wrote, "The world outside the fort might not see us as men. But when we put on that uniform, when we stood in formation, when we rode out on patrol, we knew who we were. We were soldiers, and no one could take that from us. That dignity came at a cost. Long patrols through brutal country, summer heat that could kill, winter cold, rattlesnakes, Apache ambushes, disease, and discrimination that never stopped, towns that wouldn't serve them, promotions they'd never receive, recognition that came decades too late. But they served anyway, because inside the brotherhood of the regiment, they had something precious. They had each other. They had shared purpose. They had proof, daily, tangible proof, that they were as capable, as courageous, as professional as any soldier in the world. Today, monuments to the Buffalo Soldiers stand at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Museums in Houston tell their story. In 2005, Mark Matthews, the last documented surviving Buffalo soldier, died at age 111. He'd served in the 10th Cavalry and lived long enough to see his service honored. Colin Powell, the first black Secretary of State and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, often spoke of the Buffalo Soldiers' legacy. Every black officer who has served since 1948 walks in their footsteps. Because the Buffalo Soldiers proved something that should never have needed proving, that courage, discipline, and honor have no color. The frontier era of the Buffalo Soldiers lasted from 1866 to roughly 1890, about 25 years. But in those years, they established a legacy that echoes still. 18 Medal of Honor recipients, hundreds of miles of infrastructure built, 177 engagements fought, countless lives protected, all of it done by men who were told every single day that they were less than equal. They knew better. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, think about this. It's dawn at Fort Davis in 1877. 20 cavalrymen of the 9th Cavalry are forming up for a week-long patrol. The temperature will hit 110 by noon. They're heading into country where Apache raiders might be waiting. These soldiers have been up since 3 in the morning. They've checked their gear, saddled their horses, eaten hardtack and coffee. In a few minutes, they'll ride out through the fort gates into the Chihuahuan Desert. They'll be gone for a week. They'll sleep on the ground. They'll eat cold rations. They'll scan the horizon constantly. And when they return, tired, dusty, saddle-sore, they'll get maybe a day of rest before the next patrol. Because that's the job. And they're Buffalo Soldiers, and they'll do the job, same as always, until it's done. Sleep well.